Hey guys, in this video I'll show you all tank relevant changes that came today with the update 43. For consoles, this update will arrive on 4th of September. I already released a video like this during the first week of PTS, but there have been more changes in the following weeks. So if you've watched that previous video, you should skip the timestamp shown on the screen, because that's where I start talking about the changes that came after the first week of PTS. First, we have massive buffs for the Necromancer tank. Overall buffs, because there are also tiny nerfs. You'll no longer be able to generate corpses out of combat, which is a huge quality of life nerf. If your Bone Armor or Spirit Guardian expires right after the trash dies, it won't generate any corpses, because reasons. Now onto the buffs. Boneyard and its morphs will now apply minor vulnerability to all enemies within the area. With the Unnerving Boneyard morph, this will also persist for 4.1 seconds, after they leave the area or after Boneyard expires. This is actually very useful. Up until now, the only reliable option for AoE minor vulnerability, in Trash, was Nightblade's Lotus Fan. Agony Totem was way too unreliable with its weird synergy and short duration. You could also somewhat reliably keep it up by spamming Lightning Pulsar, or make a Scribing ability that applies minor vulnerability in an AoE. But in the end, there are better Scribing combinations than that, and they aren't easy to change, so it wasn't really being used. Now, you'll be able to apply AoE minor vulnerability with an ability you were going to use in Trash anyway. Next up, Bone Armor will now also apply Minor Resolve, increasing our armor by almost 3000. This is a massive buff because Minor Resolve is crucial for reaching the armor cap. This change allows Necromancer tanks to replace Resolving Vigor with a different skill. Though keep in mind, it doesn't mean you should stop using Resolving Vigor altogether, because its heal over time effect is super strong. But now with the buffed Bone Armor, we have an option to exchange Resolving Vigor's heal for a different skill, without losing Minor Resolve. Next, Summoner's Armor will now last 30 seconds, rather than 20. Now, if you're an experienced Necrotank, you'll see how normally this would be a nerf to our Corpse and Ultimate generation. Because so far, all Necromancer Corpse generating abilities followed the rule that they will only generate an early Corpse if they've been recast after half of their duration has expired. So for example, Spirit Guardian will produce a Corpse only if you recast it after 8 seconds. Intensive Mender only after 4 seconds. Current Bone Armor only after 10 seconds. If Zos was consistent with it, then the changed Summoner's Armor would only produce a corpse after 15 seconds, rather than 10. But the thing is, Zos isn't consistent and they didn't change that part. I logged into PTS to test it, and Summoner's Armor generates a corpse even when it's recast after 10 seconds, while it still has 20 seconds of duration remaining. Next up, we have a change to Bone Totem. It will now apply Major Cowardice to all enemies inside of it, reducing their weapon and spell damage by 430. This is a massive buff, especially to Necrotank in the Infinite Archive, where enemies have extremely low weapon and spell damage values. Also, the Agony Totem synergy will no longer apply minor vulnerability, because you can do that with Boneyard now. And last, the Intensive Mender morph will now heal 2 additional targets within 8 meters of the original target. It's a nice small buff, though tanks rarely can get away with using this morph over the Spirit Guardian. Next up, we have tiny buffs for the Nightblade tank. Blur and Veiled Strike abilities have been swapped around between skill lines. This means that Blur will now benefit from the Dark Veil passive, increasing its duration by 2 seconds, and it will trigger Dark Vigor and Shadow Barrier. Speaking of Shadow Barrier, it was also buffed. It will now grant Major Resolve for 12 seconds, rather than 6, and each heavy armor piece will increase it by 2 seconds, rather than by 25%. Nightblades are also the only class to get a tank-oriented new class item set in the Infinite Archive. The Umbral Edge set has a max health, armor and max stamina stat lines, and grants you Umbral Riposte for 3 seconds, after casting a shadow ability, up to once every 6 seconds. Umbral Riposte causes you to dodge the next attack made against you, and automatically curses the attacking enemy, applying major vulnerability for 5 seconds, increasing their damage taken by 10%. This set has the potential to be slightly stronger than Turning Tide against a single target, and grants you free dodge rolls, but you have very little control over the major vuln procs, so in some fights, it could be wasted on some trash ad. There are also changes to Scribing. All focus scripts have been buffed by 3.3%, and all signature scripts have been buffed by 6.6% to mimic regular skill scaling to rank 4. Shield Throat's Druid's Resurgence script now increases your recoveries by 165, up from 152. Wield Soul's Druid's Resurgence script, however, got a big, although deserved, nerf. It now restores 600 magicka and stamina, rather than 1000. And the biggest buff to Scribing? Trample's Heroism affix script now applies major heroism, rather than minor heroism. This makes it so much stronger, especially for the Infinite Magma Shell build in the Infinite Archive, as it will allow us to completely drop Drake's Rush in favor of another set. Now Warden. Arctic Blast got a lot of changes. The initial hit is now way stronger, but the damage over time part has been weakened, resulting in no changes to total damage. You will now only get healed if the ability doesn't damage anyone. The initial hit now has a 25% chance to proc chill, but the dodge chance has been nerfed from 15% down to 10%. Its healing has also been reduced by 11%, and the cost has been reduced from 4,320 down to 3,780. And now for a change, a massive buff for Warden tanks. The Piercing Coat passive has been reworked, and it now works differently depending on your max HP. If it's above 30,000, Piercing Coat will grant you 12% block mitigation for 6 seconds, after dealing frost damage, with a 4-second cooldown. Next up we have a big change to the Undeath Vampire passive. It's getting cut in half, so now it will only reduce your damage taken by up to 15% based on your missing health, rather than 30%. I don't think it's going to be useful anywhere in this nerfed state. With the old 30% value, it was situationally useful in a few places that didn't have much fire damage and where you could sustain the penalties of being a stage 3 vampire. With the 15% value, I don't think you'll want to use it anywhere, because with the 8% increased ability cost penalty, it just doesn't feel worth it. I understand that this nerf makes sense in PvP, but in PvE, Undeath was already niche and situational. So this nerf just dumps the game down by removing situationally good build options. It's really sad that they still refuse to balance PvE and PvP separately. And the last change is a bug fix. But I decided to include it because I was getting lots of questions about it after the QuakeCon video. So in that QuakeCon run, I used Shield Throw with Defensor's Parry signature script, because it could be used to completely negate Zoran's heavy attack. Now for those who don't know the mechanics of this fight, Zoran's heavy attack applies a debuff that increases your damage taken from his next heavy attack, so you aren't supposed to take 2 of those in a row. You're supposed to swap tanks with each heavy attack. But with Defensor's Parry script, it deals 0 damage anyway, so you can solo tank it. But this is getting fixed today, and you can no longer cheese it, and you have to do the tank swap. And that's it for this video. If you have any more questions, you can comment down below, or join our Discord server Wildheart. As always, feedback will be appreciated. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to my channel and check out my Twitch. Thanks for watching and see you next time.